Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's Brand Pie and Fierce Healthcare webinar, From M&A to Cultural Transformation, How Healthcare Firms Can Drive Growth from Within. I'm Mary Lee Sachs. I'm co-founder and CEO US of Brand Pie, and I'll be moderating our panel today. Brand Pie is a consultancy that specializes in purpose-driven transformation. We help clients such as Clario, Hikma, and AstraZeneca transform their businesses by instilling clarity of purpose, building compelling brands, driving cultural innovation, and introducing new creative strategies that unlock growth. With me today are panelists from leading healthcare organizations, and we're fortunate enough to have with us the perspectives of marketing and strategy, operations, and HR, a true cross-function C-suite panel. Let me get them to introduce themselves. We'll start with Allison.
Sure. So Allison Pinkham, I am the CHRO of Galderma. It's a pure play dermatology company headquartered in Switzerland. And quick update on background, have a blend of management consulting, financial services, marketing, and HR, which all culminates together in my current experiences today.
Thank you, Allison. Matt?
Hi, Mary Lee. Great to be with you and the team today. Matt McCarthy, based in the UK. I spent the first 10 years of my life as an entrepreneur building a technology company before moving into some large life science service providers. In 2007, I spent about 12 years in large clinical research organizations, IQVIA, Icon, before moving to the executive team at what is now Clario, which we'll talk about a little bit later, a leading technology endpoints provider. And now I'm consulting, working with pharma investors and a variety of vendors focusing on growth and transformation. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Mirza?
Hello, Mary Lee. Hello, team. My name is Mirza Dalbegovic, and I am Chief Operating Officer for Bausch Health companies. In my role, I cover multiple things, including strategy and business and corporate development, including the entire operational side of the business with supply chain, manufacturing, information technology and data, real estate facilities, as well as charitable side of the company and patient assistance program. I've been in the industry for a while with Bausch Health for the past 7 years. Previously, I spent quite a bit of time in leading finance roles. I had a fortune to live in different parts of the world, travel the world, work with different people, and work with companies in different stages of its life, and companies facing different types of challenges and opportunities as well.
Thank you so much. So a real blend of experiences here at the table today. If anybody would like to read their full bios, you can do so by selecting the speakers tab on the left side of your window. So just a few notes before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. You can access closed captions from the bottom right corner of the video player. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand within 24 hours. And we'd love to hear from you. So during our presentation, please do submit any questions you have using the Q&A, questions and answers tab on the left side of your screen. And time permitting, we will conclude with a Q&A session. Okay, so let's get going. Today's session is all about transformation, and the healthcare sector is rife with it. Having transformed through mergers and acquisitions to fill portfolio gaps, fuel innovation, and drive growth, oftentimes this presents unique challenges for organizations in the space. And with antitrust regulators cracking down on megadeals in the sector, investor reluctance is a difficult macroeconomic environment, and the value for each M&A deal provides will be scrutinized highly. So our first question is really a question for all of our panelists. What are the main challenges your organizations face in the current economic climate? And Matt, I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing in your consultative work across the healthcare sector?
Sure. So I'm working with quite a variety of clients, from small tech startups who are looking for funding through to multi-billion pharma companies at a different end of the spectrum. And I think they're all having to manage the economic climate differently. Maybe if we start with M&A, given the topic of today, then obviously funding becomes more expensive as the price of debt increases. We've seen a lot of unrealistic expectation in valuation. I think particularly in the smaller technology side of the life sciences support services, there have been some very high valuations over recent years. And in the current economic climate, those valuations are just unrealistic. And that's important because that means that investors are having to hold on to companies for longer. Strategics are having to consider whether they want to pay high prices to fill portfolio gaps, as you mentioned earlier, and add services. And companies are having to trade for longer before their next exit. And so if we think more about the operating side and the impact on that, you've not only got the investment side, the cost of debt, the general economic climate, you've also got factors such as the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the impact that maybe my colleagues might touch on for pharma. And so obviously all organizations have to manage costs. And so one of the ways we're seeing that is with restructures and changing in staffing organizations, which can potentially change an existing employee's view of job security when they see that happening around them. It means there's a lot of talent on the market, all looking for a smaller number of jobs available. And so I think those are some of the factors that we're seeing, both from a kind of a corporate M&A perspective, but also from an employee perspective. And having to manage those through whilst you're still maintaining share price or investor expectation is obviously a challenge.
Right. You talk a lot about the talent piece. Allison, what are you seeing in your role?
Yeah, so I think some of the challenges we're facing, which is similar, we want to grow. Galderma is a hyper growth organization, and that can come from M&A, can come from organic growth. But when you acquire a company, obviously, as was just mentioned, it takes a lot of cost, takes a lot of funding. But not only that, you need to make sure it's a successful transformation. And there's huge stats that say how unsuccessful transformations are because you don't look at the talent piece. And when I say the talent piece, that includes culture. It includes, do you have the right skills and capabilities? How do you ensure that there's the right blend? You capitalize on the synergies that were originally envisioned as part of that transformation. So I think some of the challenges we have, so we acquired a company in California, and some of the challenges we had, it was a great fit with our portfolio, but was to make sure they had such an entrepreneurial spirit because they were much smaller than us. And even though we're not large scale, we're mid-size, we really had to make sure that we didn't want to impede their speed to market, their ability to capitalize on that entrepreneurial piece, to really capitalize on the skills and capabilities they have and make sure we could complement that and not override it, not let them get into our bureaucracy, if you will. So you really need to take a very thoughtful approach at the point you can, which says, what are the skills and capabilities they have? What do we have? What's the people strategy to ensure you can capitalize and complement each other and really make sure you have the best of both in that world of that growth and to really capitalize on that growth. Otherwise, you end up stepping on each other's toes. You create bureaucracy, you create duplication of effort, and you end up costing the company more than intended. Great news is it's worked out beautifully for us at Galderma with this new company we acquired into our portfolio, and they're a great fit. But those are the things you really need to pay attention to in these large scale transformations.
Right. Thank you. Mirza, what are you seeing?
I think that Allison and Matt very nicely described some of the both macro and micro aspects of the current environment. Matt talked about the overall cost of capital aspect, investor expectations, and how that introduces certain dynamics. And I think Allison nicely covered the M&A aspect and cultural fits. The one thing that I would just add to this conversation is I think that the world has changed quite a bit over the past years. And I think that with COVID, quite a few things changed, which includes the aspect of working, the expectation that people have from the workplace, the aspect of hybrid working and the overall culture around hybrid working, what the expectations are and how this whole thing is balanced out. And then on the top of it, as we were coming out of COVID as global economy, we face the inflation issues, which creates problems for the company from the operating perspective. And then if you think about the talent and people, that introduces additional pressures in the overall relationship and how that's managed. And the other thing which I've been dealing with is the overall global supply chain situation, which was pretty difficult for a period of time, and I hope it's going to stabilize over time.
Great. Thank you for that. Research from our latest CEO Purpose Report, which is a study of CEOs' attitudes and behaviors towards purpose, found that 80% of healthcare organizations have a purpose. It was the sector in our report that had the highest level of purpose. And within this, 85% of healthcare CEOs stated that their purpose impacts the majority of their business decisions, which is great. Matt, I've got a question for you. You're Clario's former chief strategy and marketing officer, and one organization that has used purpose to drive decision making is Clario, which is a clinical trials data management company that was formed in 2021 following the merger between ERT and BioClinica. What was the challenge, or what the challenge that ERT and BioClinica faced, and how did you bring those two businesses and cultures together?
Yeah, sure. And as an aside, I'm not too surprised by the findings in your recent report. We're a very purpose-driven industry, and you talk to people from top to bottom. There's a lot of purpose-driven people in our industry, but it's great to see that coming through in a more corporate identity. So for ERT and BioClinica, which were the two organizations that came together, they were both leading endpoint technology companies. ERT founded 50 years ago, BioClinica 30 years ago, each with multiple acquisitions along the way and thousands of staff in a global regulated environment. So we're talking about a complex combination with two very different cultures, but yet two very established brands, which made me face a few key decisions. The market was seeing an increasing number of startups talking about modern technology and innovation. And so how did we go to market as a combined entity, demonstrating relevance and increased value in that environment, but without destroying the credibility that 30, 40, 50 years of experience and proven delivery and brand credibility brings? How do we structure and align the thousands of employees to achieve this and to reinvigorate from the future in a time of significant change, which is what always happens during these periods of mergers and acquisitions? But I think also very top of mind for us is we didn't want to lose any focus on customer delivery or suffer either employee or customer retention issues, which often happens, I think, when customers become a bit internally focused and thinking about themselves as an organization. And so we were very keen to ensure that customers still came first and that employees could see clearly and transparently what was happening. And I think with all of those considerations and key questions about the organization's future and direction, it's really important to start with strategy and alignment and who you are and who you want to be. People often jump straight to thinking about brand and marketing and values and culture. But for me, all of that needs to come out of a clear direction of what are you trying to achieve? Who do you want to be in the marketplace? And so before the merger even closed, we spent plenty of time focusing on all of those things, working out our positioning and our purpose. And it was extremely helpful to have an external partner who was independent. In our case, we worked with Brandpie to work through all of the evidence and insights. We interviewed customers, we interviewed employees, we looked at reports and data that we had, and to really figure out our unique place and identity in the industry, who we were today and who we would be going forward and what we had to offer. And then that informed every key decision. So before we even talked about brand colors or future values, we had that foundation for that transformation, which allowed us to work through a fairly complex rebrand of both companies coming together in less than about 6 months. So we worked through all sorts of cultural changes. We put out new values, new purpose. We created the brand, clear focus on who we were going to be. But I think that underpinning clarity of identity, whether we talked about with the employees in the lead up to the rebrand or to the market once we rebranded, really helped us to be consistent and clear in bringing those together.
Great, thank you. Mirza, you've been in pharmaceutical companies that have gone through M&A. How do you ensure those portfolios that are coming together are relevant and fit for the future in the pharmaceutical business?
It's a great question, Mary Lee. If I look at my company, Bausch Health, we have grown very, very fast through a streak of different M&A and business development deals. As you go through this phase of company growth, you go pretty fast, and the tempo is really high, and often there is no time to think about integration and think about how do you get the most out of each asset and the synergies between different assets. Uh, this strategy is very long to keep for a long period of time. Simply finding new targets and being successful in closing new targets is a very difficult task, and it's very difficult to achieve that in a sustainable fashion over time. Where Bausch Health is right now, we are turning company from portfolio company that Bausch Health used to be into a true operational company. And I think we were quite fortunate that in this process of building up company through M&A activity, we actually acquired a number of assets which are very relevant from patient and unmet medical need perspective, therapeutic area perspective, and are very relevant from other competencies perspective, whether it's a research and development, commercial infrastructure, market access infrastructure, and so on, as well as very relevant from geographic footprint perspective. So in the current phase of the company, we are really looking at the core that we have and how can we go as deep as possible to the core and get the most out of the core competencies that we have. Clearly, we are doing this in conjunction with looking at the external environment and where are the biggest overlaps between where external environment is going, so outside in, versus where our core competencies are. In the industry that we are in, clearly there are big deals and there could be a significant mega M&A activity, but also looking at the industry, as I think as everybody on the call knows, there are companies and players with different competencies, and there is a lot of possibility for cooperation and partnering as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be true M&A and acquisition activity. We see a very clear path forward, which combines our internal capabilities and what we have going on internally already from pipeline perspective and overall business development perspective, as well as possible cooperation and partnering deals with other companies which may have things that we do not have. But we have a number of complementary things that are very attractive to other partners.
Great, thank you. God, so many things to think about. Allison, Galderma is a pure play dermatology leader and started out as a joint venture between L'Oreal and Nestle, but now is privately owned business with a wide brand portfolio. It has a wonderful purpose statement, which is, and I'd like to share it with everybody, advancing dermatology for every skin story. As Galderma spun off from Nestle, how did you define your purpose, culture, and employer value proposition as a standalone organization? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So you would think that because we were spin off from Nestle, we already had culture defined, that it was basically, okay, we're just going to focus on dermatology. But really, at the end of the day, we had to look at ourselves and say, who are we? I think somebody mentioned, and there's a question in the chat, what is the right culture for us? And this spinoff happened in 2019. I joined in 2021, and nobody had really defined the culture. We could feel it. We could sort of wrap our arms around it. We knew why we enjoyed working at the company, but it was very unique. It was not a large scale pharma company. I'd worked large scale pharma. That wasn't it. It was really a very fast paced organization that was very purpose driven. So what we did was we did a ton of interviews, focus groups with all levels of the organization, said, why do you love working at Galderma? What does this culture mean to you? What are the things that stand out? And funny enough, it all culminated in the same 5 themes that everybody basically said in every single interview, every single focus group, but we had never defined it. And basically the 5 things were that we are a high growth company. People really enjoyed working at a company that wants to win because we want to advance dermatology for every skin story. And we really aligned behind that and we're driven by that purpose. Number two, we're also a high performance organization. People like working on a winning team, if you will. So we really liked that everyone is very driven, not only on the purpose, but actually being driven from a business sense. Number three was our people. People loved working with each other. At the end of the day, it really is, for lack of a better term, good people, people that you really can rally behind, have their back, and really make sure that you want to win together. The fourth thing was also collaboration, which is a little bit linked to people, but it went beyond that. It said we want to really be a team oriented spirit. We are not individuals, we are a team, we're collective, and we win behind that collective spirit. And then the last one was really at a deeper level that people wanted to, they liked that they could maneuver their careers across three lines of business. So we're pharmaceuticals, we're aesthetics, we're consumer. And people love that they can make their mark. They can grow so quickly at Galderma and have such broad experiences. So we culminated into these themes. We wrapped it into our employer value proposition. And it was the number one ever viewed communication message globally throughout the organization. People just were on fire for this culture that we had defined because they said, that is it. That is who we are. Why is this important? Because I mentioned this acquisition we did in California, but we were going through our own transformation. When you spin off from Nestle, a much bigger organization, you had to figure out, how do you define your own processes, purpose, what's your pipeline, what is your strategy? We went through our own transformation just as an organization from a spinoff. So we really rallied behind this purpose of advancing dermatology for every skin story, but also our culture, and really uniting as one organization that really had to go through a lot of bumps in the road, end-to-end systems, end-to-end transformations. But we said at the end of the day, we're in this together and we all win together. So I think it's really important that you can use your purpose to not just align from an M&A perspective to bring new companies in, but you actually can align your own employee base to really rally behind multiple changes, multiple transformations, and really keep that beacon of light that people can hold on to when the day-to-day operations sometimes are challenging in these different transformations.
That's wonderful. I love hearing how you really galvanized everybody internally. We would always advocate for looking at a business from the inside out. So I think that's a great story. One of the questions that's just come up in the chat, which is actually kind of mirroring one of my next questions, is, what do you see are the biggest challenges to create the right culture in your business? Maybe, Mirza, if you could talk a little bit about that. I think we've been talking a lot about the great things that can happen, but what are some of the sort of pitfalls that we have to be aware of, the challenges, particularly when it comes to the employees?
Thanks for the question, Mary Lee. I think Alison, as she was talking about Galderma, she used the term all in. All in is a very, very important aspect and a great idea. But achieving all in is not very easy and very straightforward. I think that engaging people and making everybody all in starts with ability to communicate and clearly paint the future. Excuse me. Clearly explain to employees where the company is going. And in the world, which is very fast-paced, and often short-term oriented, there is no enough talk about the future and where we are going. Also, as we are doing this, I think the element of honesty is very important. The element of being authentic, and the element of being simple and straightforward and easy to understand. once you do this, and once you are able to really connect at that level, and people see the future, people believe in what we are trying to do, and they are able also to explain it to the other colleagues, the overall story starts to come together. And from the story, you start turning into action, and you are able to walk the talk. I mean, all those things seem intuitive and common sense and straightforward. But achieving this with a large population base and people in various stages of career in different markets, people coming from different backgrounds, people that may come from different generations and views on life and work, that takes time and takes effort. It does create a challenge, but I personally see it much more as an opportunity, because once you do it, I think the sky is the limit.
Thank you. Matt, what's your view? You've been through the process. What are the challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that Alison and Mirza just said. But maybe when I think about some of the challenges just pragmatically in these types of transformations, alignment and consistency, maybe the marketing perception of a forward looking company isn't always perfectly aligned to an employee's reality during that transformation in times of change. So, how do you get that alignment and that consistency? Holding on to previous ways of doing things, that's our safety as human beings. I've been there, I've done this before, I know how to do this. And so in times of change, how do you allow people the risk area of change and doing things differently and making sure you support that positively? Employee mindshare. Most employees want to do their day-to-day job well and focus on their lives and their families and their outside activities. And as executive teams, we spend much time talking about cultural transformation and market opportunity and the strategic benefits of the change. And in reality, that's not where most of our employees live. So how do you get the appropriate mind share for the direction of change and the transformation alongside the day-to-day? And then Mirza touched on it briefly, but in a global organization, cultural differences. We all know there's huge cultural differences from country to country or region to region, different generations, different socioeconomic factors. And how do you create a consistent organizational culture that still allows for those variations? And maybe a few thoughts on some things that are helpful. I found clarity and transparency with your employee base extremely important. Most initiatives that are dreamt up in the boardroom and cascaded out corporately with as a big surprise don't tend to have the impact you want. And so how do you take your entire team on that journey? There are obviously things that have to be developed and released at certain times, but I think if you see it as a secret one and done, you're probably setting yourself up to fail. And so how can you keep communicating your organization from early strategy and direction and reason for change? Mirza talked about setting the vision for where you're going and who you want to be, and employees feeling like they're part of that journey and they know what's going on. I found that employees don't like waiting for the suspense of something coming. That often makes them a bit nervous about what's happening they don't know about, and so I think that's important. I think showing the reality of change and transformation. Many of the organizations I work with, and I'm sure for Alison and Mirza too, have big purposes, big visions for the change that they can deliver. But how do you show that in small incremental steps? How do you show you're making progress in your direction of travel? And I think that lends credibility. It's very well to say we're going to climb Everest, but booking a flight to base camp is a good evidence of direction of intent, right? And so, how can you show up in those moments and reinforce that you are genuinely delivering against what you're saying? And I think listening. Not everything can be dreamt up. Small number of executives or expert external agencies. You need to listen to your people. What are they finding on the ground? How are they seeing the change? What did we get wrong? I mean, heaven forbid we roll a program out and we didn't dream up every possible risk. And actually our employees who are living it day to day can help us iterate and evolve. And maybe one last thought before I let you move on. I think also being integrated in big transformations. We've got representation of multiple different aspects of organizational structure and leadership here today. And whether you're talking about culture and values or employee value propositions or brand and marketing or acquisition strategy, those often line up under different teams and different executives. But if you're talking about cultural change in an organization, you have to be aligned and integrated. We, of course, I worked with my colleague, my chief HR officer, on lots of the elements around the culture and the values and the employee value proposition. But we found ultimately that it was our redefined purpose and our new brand that aligned with that had the biggest initial impact on our employees. That actually then being able to buy into an exciting future and believe where we were going and want to be part of that journey was really valuable to them in the context we were at. And so having that consistency of that continued message throughout everything, regardless of which particular organizational silo it might be coming out from, and being integrated across that was really important.
Love it. Thank you so much. That's a lot to process. I love the concept of, it's not just one and done. You've got to kind of, to use another term, got to walk the talk. Allison, you've got a great purpose. How do you use that purpose to shape your business, to guide your business, to shape your people strategy, kind of going forward? You did a lot of work to kind of get there. Now, how does that play out?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, we do look to the purpose as the beacon of where we all need to align together. And this goes all the way down to the organization, even in decision making, empowerment, speed of processes, things like that, in order to get the best medicine to the right patient to ensure we're advancing dermatology for every skin story. But a couple of things that were just said really struck me, because this is something that we also found in our transformation, why our purpose is so important. And going back to the original example I mentioned from a merger and acquisition, I think it's really important to do your due diligence from a cultural perspective, first and foremost, to say, will this be a fit with our culture? Because at the end of the day, if it really is an A or a B, it's going to be really difficult to get those two organizations to combine and be fruitful in a merger and acquisition. I think that's really something that's important to look at. And culture is such a big word. The other thing we just talked about just a second ago is you have to peel back the onion. There's so many things that define a culture, create a culture. Decision making, as one example. When I was in consulting, we worked with a couple clients where they went through a merger and acquisition, and they didn't get very granular and said, how do we make decisions at an organization? One was very more about decentralization, decision making at the ground level. The other one was very centralized decision making. And this created a lot of angst, frustration, duplication of effort. And with that, I mean, even though we had the purpose at the time, it was also something that you have to look at, not just purpose, but all the things that come down from that, in this case, decision making, and say, how are we going to make decisions? Another thing, simple one, but how do we use digital technology? How do we look at our efficient processes? How do we ensure that what is the role of leaders? How much do they empower employees? So you almost have to peel back this onion to get at the very granular level to define what defines the culture and how do we align on it. And one of the things that we found to be most successful is the whole co-creation process. So you may have two organizations have two processes, define decision making, but if you really want to create the best of both, you need to be willing to take a step back and say, how do we co-create here? It's one thing to say, get on board. We mentioned this before. It's one thing to say we're all in, but you can't just tell people, hey, let's all be in. You really need to engage them in this process. And I mean, truly engage, which means be willing to change things to bring the best of both worlds. So the purpose could be one thing. If you're willing to change your purpose, it's great if you all align behind it. In our case, in our acquisitions, everyone aligned behind our purpose, which is great. But in previous examples I've had, you had to co-create a purpose, but that also means co-creating decision-making, co-creating processes, co-creating roles and responsibilities. And then people really feel bought in to this new organization that they're a part of. And I think that's something we can't overshadow, especially if it's more of a acquisition versus a merger. It's not just about overtaking and saying, well, this is it, you need to abide, because that is not something that's really going to be fruitful in the end. So I think that's really important. And then to answer your question directly, how does it translate in the people strategy? So when you go through these different elements, that's the definition of a people strategy. What do we need to look at from an org design perspective, decision-making perspective, processes perspective, skills and capabilities perspective, and all these elements. Then you define what do you need in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Then you develop a plan based on that. And that's a co-created plan based on all the different leaders involved.
Great. I love the concept of co-creation. That's fantastic. And to see it play out is wonderful. I'm just going to remind everybody who's participating, watching, to please put your questions in the chat. I've got a really interesting one here from, I hope I don't butcher his name, Bill Brodnitsky. What frameworks do you see personally like? He likes John Cotter's leading change approach. he thinks it's a bit dated now? Is there something more current that you kind of think about when you're thinking about frameworks? Anybody? Not gonna call anybody out here.
I mean, Kotner's approach is well known, and I don't know if I'd call it dated. I mean, it's been around a while, but the principles of it probably still stand. I mean, it starts with creating a sense of urgency. In my experience, that's usually pretty easy. Organizations don't tend to spend time and money on rebrand or changing cultural purchase unless there is some significant opportunity, burning platform, sense of urgency. So I agree with that. Whether every time you need to completely follow an 8-step process, I think frameworks are helpful for making sure you learn from the past and don't miss out on key steps. But every organization and scenario is different. Just as Alison was just talking about the difference between M&A and mergers and small acquisitions of the same cultures versus coming together with different cultures. And so, sure, a framework can be helpful, and that this is not the first time we've been around this, so we should learn from the past and have consistency. But I think really understanding your situation and making sure you put a plan together that is relevant for what you're trying to achieve is probably the most important to me.
Thanks. Marissa,
go ahead. I was just going to echo in one other one. I also like, it's not a framework, but there's a book, Managing Transitions. And I think it really gets at the heart. It's the emotional component of folks, which again, it's an older book, but I think it's always still relevant. We have to remind ourselves with any change, even if it's good or bad, people go through the change curve, which is, all the different emotions that come with that. And employees don't check their emotions at the door, whether they're even the organization that is being acquired or the organization that's acquiring. And many times these transformations come with, unfortunately, some, layoffs and so forth. So there's a number of those things where we can't forget that transformation is not just about a great strategy, a great, way to get to a more profitable EBITDA and so forth. It's really around the people that are involved and how do you help them through that change. So I think that's always another one that's managing transitions that's important to augment for any large scale transformation from a more individual people level.
And Alison, what was the name of that? It was a book that you mentioned?
Yeah, Managing Transitions. Yeah.
Managing Transitions. Okay. Marissa, anything to add? Because I've got a question for you coming up next.
I think Alison and Matt covered it perfectly. Nothing more to add.
Okay. I do have a question for you specifically. You mentioned growth through partnerships as opposed to M&As or in addition to M&As. How do you identify such partners? How would you go about identifying such partners?
It's a great question. I mean, healthcare is a very interesting industry, and it's really an ecosystem of the companies. And as part of the ecosystem, the company needs to be aware what else is out there, especially in the areas that the company is engaged in. So being part of the overall healthcare community, using the established forums and conferences, and then knowing what other companies do, understanding what their capabilities are, getting in touch with them, starting conversation. There are various ways to identify potential avenues for partnership, and staying in touch and talking to people is the most important thing. Once you start growing your network, and not everybody is a competitor. We don't go head to head. There's quite a few opportunities to work together. Once you do that, and once you start talking to people, and once you are really nicely tuned in, those opportunities start emerging. And then you have to go deeper and understand if there is really a good fit, if it can work culturally, if it can work financially, and quite a few opportunities can emerge.
Great, thank you. When two companies come together, if two business of vastly different cultures come together, and this is one of the questions in the chat, through merger or acquisition, how do you go about uniting the cultures if they are so far apart? Does anyone have a point of view on that?
I mean, I can start. In my career, I've been in different situations, and strategies were different. Not necessarily, you have to put two cultures together and get to the synergy. There is a strategy which is running the company as a portfolio. And you can just say, I'll have two companies, I'll keep them separate, and I will keep the common interests on the top. And through the common interests, I'll manage the entire situation. I think the strategy is easier in short term because it doesn't require uh, difficult and challenging actions from culture merger perspective. But then from midterm and long term, you typically never get to the maximum of potential. I think once you start going through a process of trying to merge the cultures, trying to create a melting pot, or trying to create something which is optimal, uh, that process is tricky overall. And I think there needs to be, to Allison's point, as potential targets identified, you need to find a target which has a sufficient compatibility level. If there is no compatibility, it's very, very difficult.
Anybody
I
else
agree
have
with
a,
Mert.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with Mert about challenging the premise. Is it the right thing to do to truly bring those things together? So that should be a question first. But if you do end up in a situation where you really want to integrate fully, two entities with different cultures, then I think Alison summed it up personally about looking at the best of both. That was absolutely our mantra at Clario with ERT and Bioclinica. And we actually went to market with our rebrand as Clario, the best of ERT and Bioclinica. And that was our mantra all through integration, co-creation of processes, common integration teams, making sure we had representation from both organizations, whether that was early on thinking about the values of the organization or practically thinking about process and decision making. We didn't use the term co-creation, but I love it, Alison. But that is essentially what we did. And I think that is absolutely the right way to go about it. I think if one entity feels like it's being absorbed into the other and its culture's going away, you're going to disenfranchise a lot of people and lose a lot of value. And so setting a clear direction of why, what are we going to achieve, how are we going to be better together, but then making sure that both organizations are listened to and the best of both those organizations are brought through has to be the best way to do it.
Allison, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I mean, just to echo, it's the same. I would just be very cautious in the beginning when you're looking to target because it is really difficult to do when two companies are vastly different culture. And you can do it, but it takes a lot of work at the grassroots level to make it happen, just as the two gentlemen had shared. So, yeah, I would just say exercise caution is probably the right way to say it, but it can be done. Just be ready to be ready to work hard for it.
Yeah, roll your sleeves up. What advice would you give about transforming your culture in line with organizational change? So let's say you're all together, but you're going to do something different. How do you transform a culture? And Allison, I'll maybe start with you on that one.
Yeah, so actually we've gone through this at Galderma because you have, like I said, we're a spinoff. So it was a little bit of a blend of new joiners, a huge amount of new joiners over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, and those who came from the Nestle organization, kind of Nestle heritage. So the transformation we had to go through it's actually quite massive. We had to create our own end-to-end processes. We couldn't take anything from Nestle. Obviously, we were a spinoff. So we had to create our own end-to-end systems, end-to-end processes, new ways of making decisions. What is our purpose statement? And every single function had to go through this. In HR was one example, but everybody had to go through it, finance and others, to really say, how do we also optimize efficiencies? Where are the duplications of effort? What is the org design structure we need going forward? Who is it that we want to be? What is our vision? So every single element of transformation has gone on at Galderma over the last 3.5 years. But it's also created the beauty, like I said, because you had a number of new joiners and folks who came over from Nestle, is we did use this co-creation approach. And we did create this Galderma organization as our own organization. And that's why I think we were so excited when we ran these focus groups and interviews and really created an EVP that truly spoke to who we are. And it's unique to Galderma. It's not cookie cutter. You can't take somebody from a large pharma and plug them into Galderma. It won't work. You really need to make sure, for example, somebody's able to operate at extreme fast pace, roll up their sleeves, empowering their teams to make decisions, collaborative, and really understands how to win together as an organization, and makes that first and foremost. And then you build it into your interviews and your assessments, and make sure that those who are bringing in can fit with that culture element. But as part of the transformation, the beauty of transformation is you get to co-create it together, end to end. Like I said, everything from how to make decisions, strategy, processes, and systems. And it's brutal because you're doing it on top of your day job. But the beauty, like I said, is it's almost like going through a boot camp together a little bit, where you all get to co-create it. And at the end, you really feel like it is your organization, even though you've come from all these different elements, including the company, for example, we acquired from California. We're all transforming together and co-creating it together. So I think that's the beauty of transformation, to create it as your own organization.
Yeah. I got a great question that's come into the chat. What if you acquire many other companies? You cannot keep co-creating or redefining your purpose and culture. Can you speak to how you might engage and align acquired employees as you kind of go through that process? Actually, I'm working on one right now, which is exactly like that. So I'd really love to hear your views.
Maybe I'll start, because actually we went through it. We did not, we have not shifted at all on our purpose. So at Galderma, we've stayed true to our purpose. We said we're not going to co-create our purpose. This is really important. This is what we stand for: advancing dermatology for every skin story. And then we did look for companies that fit into that purpose, that said they also are into advancing dermatology for every skin story. So I totally agree with whoever asked the question, that you can't just keep co-creating purpose. So purpose was something that we locked in, and we said this is what it is. The other thing we locked in was we also want to gain efficiencies in terms of being able to centralize certain decision making and decentralize other decision making. So there was a couple of these, I'll call them pillars, that were non-negotiables, that we said, okay, these are our pillars. And then when we look to acquire a company, again, in the due diligence, we want to make sure they fit with that. Now, there's things you can co-create. Like I said, the company we created was used to, is much more entrepreneurial. They were smaller. And how they ran their supply chain was different than how we ran supply chain. But what we did was actually did lessons learned. So you can still do lessons learned, say, how do we make ours more efficient? How do we make this more efficient? So from my experience, and this is also back in consulting, there are certain things that we did with our clients that said, what are your non-negotiables that you need to stay firm, and what can you co-create together? Because otherwise, yes, if you co-create everything, it ends up becoming, and I think this was shared earlier, you don't really know where the company is headed. So I think you need to be very firm on a couple of those things, also strategy and so forth. But there's always room to co-create within that, to make sure that people feel they're a part of the new organization.
Yeah. Mirza, Matt, any perspectives from you on that?
The only thing that I would add, in line with what Alison said, I think as companies create their, or as they settle on their mission and purpose, mission and purpose needs to be broad enough to account for potential mergers and acquisitions in the future. So you do not create a situation where, with a very narrow mission and purpose, you have another company coming in, and then it's very, very difficult to convert them and put them under this purpose. I think if you have the right vision, the right purpose, which is broad enough, you make your life much, much easier in a potential M&A deal.
Yeah, good point. Good question here. If you could give a perspective on keeping a founder during an integration, and if yes, how long and in what role?
I don't mind starting this off. I saw
That looks like he's going to jump in.
come across of that a few times. It can be a real challenge. I think, having worked with a lot of smaller service providers, maybe, who are at a different place to some of the larger pharma companies that we regularly acquire, or I'm part of a private equity that are acquiring smaller founder-led businesses. And I think it really depends on the circumstance and the founder themselves. In many companies that are started up, the founder is doing the subject matter expertise, the passion, the business development, the relationships. The business is built around that founder's credibility. And in that scenario, the founder is such a key part of the value of the company that you have to seriously look at how that's going to continue. I've seen scenarios where there's been retention plans put in place so the founder hangs around for 12, 18 months and etc. to make sure the transition happens effectively. But actually, in a lot of cases, I was having dinner with a CEO at a conference earlier this week. He's not a new CEO, but a new CEO of a founder-led company. And that founder's moved into a role leading innovation labs. And that's been a perfect fit, that they've brought in a CEO who has experience with markets and scaling and organizational operation. And the founder's been able to go back to where they started, which is innovating and setting the future product roadmap of the company. And I think that's a great scenario where you can keep a founder involved where their skills and passion align, versus kind of having to lose them and really change the company. So I think it's huge variation in what that looks like, but it is absolutely a factor. Losing a founder in an acquisition can radically change the value of the company you're acquiring, sorry.
Great. Anybody else have a perspective on that? It's a great opportunity to kind of think about how to use a founder in a key role. I've got a question here about really kind of the C-suite. Who apart from the CEO is the biggest advocate for purpose and culture in your organizations or in past organizations you've been in? Mirza, do you want to take that one on to start?
Yeah, sure. The way we work in Bausch Health is we have executive leadership team, which works very closely together in designing what the vision is, what for visioning, and then determining what the purpose and the mission is. And from that alignment, communication to employees and getting employees on board start. So it's a very collaborative process overall. Clearly, the CEO is the person. He's the captain of the ship. Is the person who is the key in creating the vision. But then everybody else on executive leadership team, HR plays a huge role clearly. But then everybody else, all the business and functional leaders, are taking part of the process. And I think having that broad involvement and broad representation, which can then cascade down to the entire organization, is very important.
Anybody else have some interesting experiences? I mean, we talk a lot about leadership alignment and getting everybody on board and making sure that everybody is kind of working to the same tune. But the CEO obviously is key. Are there other really important people peers in your C-suite that you think are super important to the process?
I mean, to me, I would answer the same as Mirza, which is basically it's all the CEO minus one and even the next level down. I think they need to fully not just embrace the culture, but role model it. That's something that's really important, which is if employees see, we say this is important in our culture, and then you only see one or two leaders following and the others not, that quickly derails a culture. So I think it's really that CEO -1 and -2 level that need to walk the talk, if you will, and really be able to be role models in the organization and truly exemplify that in how they behave, how they make the decisions, and how they treat their employees and their teams.
Great.
I agree completely. Not everybody, it's not going to work for all the reasons Alison just said. But I think it's also important to think beyond the most senior leaders. It's common to have brand or change or cultural ambassadors. That doesn't always work so well if you kind of pick those people, based on a PowerPoint org chart. But there were always people in the organization who were more passionate about the change or more on board with the change or quick to change. And if you can harness them in a more peer-to-peer relationship as well, I think that has a huge amount of value versus execs standing up on a Teams call and presenting a PowerPoint. That'd be something to add.
That's great.
And then just to add one more thing, in line with what Alison said and Matt said, I think finding those change agents and change ambassadors who are passionate, but also live the change, for example, that actually do things that represent the change every day is really important.
If you had one piece of advice to give to a business leader who is in an organization that's going through some kind of transformation, merger, acquisition, what's the one thing that you would say to them? Matt, I'm going to start with you.
Sorry, I missed that. Was that me you were going to start with there?
Yeah, sorry. If you had
Apologies.
one piece of
Yeah, no, I
advice?
heard.
Yeah,
Yeah, One Piece. It's so difficult, isn't it, without knowing any specifics? I think for me, change is iterative. Whether you're talking about cultural change, which we've done a lot today, or some of the more pragmatic aspects of merger and acquisition, to define a future state and expect that to happen in a boil the ocean short term way is probably extremely unrealistic and is going to result in people thinking that it's been a failure or giving up. And so I think what are the tangible ways in which you can show change, make change, drive change? So from a cultural perspective, that might be find an area of the business that would benefit most from the areas of change in the culture that you're looking to adopt, and then dig in hard and work on making that real and demonstrating the value of that. I mean, obviously, if you're doing a full integration, you have to deal with that full integration at once. In which case, my second one piece of advice would be what Alison said earlier about the best of both and the co-creation.
right. Allison.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my one piece of advice is do not underestimate the change management components on the cultural transformation with any transformation M&A deal. We always say that it's been years and years and years, but it always starts way too late. And by then, unfortunately, I think companies lose. There's a huge amount of opportunity costs, how much they've lost without really thinking through and planning for that upfront. So that's my one piece of advice I would always say is make sure as you're looking at all the due diligence elements, make sure that that change management piece is really planned for very early, like step one, step two, if you will, in the journey.
Great. Thank you. Mirza, how about you? What's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone?
Yeah, I think the one piece of advice that I would give is it's very important to have the long term vision and the strategy and where things are supposed to, what are the outcomes of all this effort. And it's very important to be able to communicate this and explain to people why is this relevant to everybody who is involved in transformation and the cultural change. And then to the point which is made, not investing in the process of managing the change is very important. People often assume that this can be a part-time job or a hobby, and it needs to be done for a very short period of time. I I think that could be a major pitfall. So making sure there is a right infrastructure, discipline, and rigor behind it, and then the last piece is as as we are going through the change, or as any company is going through the change, it's very important to show and celebrate short-term wins. Many of these transformational changes or integration projects do have long-term runways, and people get tired and people start losing faith. So ability to set the milestones and have milestones which are tangible and can be recognized and celebrated is very important.
Great. This is some great advice for those who are on the call today going through this. So thank you so much for your time. Our panelists have been fantastic. We've had some thanks in the chat. So thank you. This has been really wonderful. Just a reminder that the recorded version of the webinar will be available for access within 24 hours. And using the same audience link. I'd just like to thank our panelists and I thank everybody who joined today. It was a great conversation.